Number 1. The Chrisleys. For nearly a decade, they were America's perfect family, broadcast in high definition. Chrisley Knows Best was not just a reality show. It was a brand built on absolute dazzling perfection. At the center was Todd Chrisley, the patriarch of perfection. A sharp-tongued, hilarious, and unapologetically controlling father who ruled his family with a designer-clad iron fist. Alongside him was Julie, the perfect Southern matriarch, the calm in his storm. Their children were beautiful, their problems were trivial, and their lifestyle was the stuff of fantasy. They lived in sprawling 30,000-square-foot mansions in Atlanta. Their closets overflowed with Gucci, Chanel, and Dior. They drove Bentleys and Range Rovers. Their entire identity was built on three things: faith, family, and finance. They preached about Christian values, about hard work, and about the importance of family. And millions of people bought it. They were rich. They were funny. They were aspirational. But the entire thing, every mansion, every luxury car, every designer suit, every lecture about morality, was a lie. A breathtaking $30 million fraud. And the man who claimed he knew best was about to become the federal government's #1 example of a con man. The story of the Chrisley fraud does not begin with the TV show. It begins long before, in the world of Atlanta real estate. Before he was a reality star, Todd Chrisley was a local developer, and he had a burning, insatiable desire for a life he simply could not afford. So he decided to create that life on paper. According to federal prosecutors, Todd and Julie began a scheme that was as simple as it was arrogant. They became digital forgers. They would take their real bank statements, which showed they had no money, and use computers to cut and paste. They would digitally manufacture fake documents, making it look like they had millions. They would create fraudulent financial reports. They would inflate their assets. They built an entire paper empire of imaginary wealth, and then they took this fantasy portfolio to the banks. They were actors long before they were on TV. They played the part of successful, wealthy developers. And the banks, they believed it. They didn't just believe it. They threw money at them. Loan after loan. 10 million. 20 million. By 2012, they had fraudulently obtained over $30 million in bank loans. They were living like royalty on borrowed money. Money they had no ability and no intention of ever paying back. They were at the top of the Atlanta social scene. But this kind of fraud is not a game you can play forever. In 2012, the house of cards collapsed. The real estate market had crashed. The loans were due. The $30 million was gone. The banks finally realized they had been duped. Facing financial ruin, Todd Chrisley did what any con man would do. He filed for corporate bankruptcy, walking away from $20 million in debt. It should have been the end. A story of greed, collapse, and public humiliation. But for Todd Chrisley, it was just the beginning. Because just as this financial empire was collapsing in disgrace, a new one was rising from its ashes. Hollywood came calling. A production company loved Todd's loud, flamboyant personality. They saw a star. They saw a show. Chrisley Knows Best was born. In 2014, the show premiered, and it was an instant hit. The Chrisleys were suddenly earning real money. Millions of dollars were pouring in from the USA Network. This was their chance to go legitimate, to pay their debts, to finally become the wealthy family they had always pretended to be. Instead, they did exactly what they had always done. They hid it. According to prosecutors, Todd and Julie set up a new secret system. They created a corporation called 7 Seas Productions. But they did not put their own names on the bank accounts. They opened them in Julie's mother's name. They funneled their millions in TV income into this secret account, hiding it from the IRS, who was still looking for their old tax money, and from the banks they had bankrupted. They were defrauding the banks on the way up, and they were defrauding the government on the way down. For years, they lived this double life. On camera, they were the perfect, wealthy family. Off camera, they were routing their paychecks through shell companies. They were untouchable, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had trusted the wrong person. His name was Mark Braddock. He was their former business partner. He was, according to his own testimony, the man who had helped them commit the fraud. He was their inside man. He had access to the computers. He had helped create the fake documents. He was part of the conspiracy. And when the relationship between Todd and Braddock exploded in a bitter falling out, Braddock went nuclear. He went to the FBI. He walked into the federal building with the keys to the kingdom. He had the hard drives. He had the emails. He had the text messages. He had the fake financial statements. He had everything. The federal government began a quiet, meticulous investigation. They followed the money. They saw the secret accounts in the grandmother's name. They saw the forged documents. In 2019, while the Chrisleys were still on the air, preaching about faith and finances, a federal grand jury indicted them on 12 counts, including bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and tax evasion. Todd Chrisley did what he always does. He went on the offensive. He went on his podcast. He went on TV. He called it all a lie, a setup. He claimed Mark Braddock was a bitter, obsessed, homosexual ex-employee who was framing them. He was arrogant. He was defiant. He was sure he could charm a jury just like he had charmed a TV audience for a decade. He was wrong. The trial was a disaster for the Chrisleys. The jury did not see a charming patriarch. They saw a con man. They saw the actual fake documents. They heard the testimony from the banks they had defrauded. They heard Mark Braddock, their own son, testify against them in chilling detail. After a 3-week trial, the verdict was swift. Guilty. On all counts. In November 2022, the sentence came down, and it was a shockwave. The judge was not impressed by their fame. He called their fraud brazen and disgusting. He sentenced Todd Chrisley to 12 years in federal prison. He sentenced Julie Chrisley to 7 years. The perfect family was shattered. The mansions were seized. The show was canceled. The lie was finally over. The story of Todd and Julie Chrisley is a modern parable. It is a story about the terrifying gap between the image we project and the reality we live. They did not just want to be rich. They wanted the world to watch them be rich, so badly that they built an empire on a foundation of lies, a foundation that inevitably collapsed, burying them in the rubble. Number 2. Jen Shah. When The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City premiered in 2020, it introduced the world to a new, chaotic force of nature. Her name was Jen Shah. She was not subtle. She was a tornado of designer labels, custom couture, and explosive emotion. She was loud, she was confrontational, and she was, in her own words, Shah-amazing. She threw $100,000 parties. She had an army of assistants, the Shah Squad, who followed her everywhere, catering to her every whim. She lived in a massive rented mansion she called the Shah Ski Chalet. Her entire persona was built on one thing: extreme, unapologetic, and inexplicable wealth. But almost immediately, there was a glaring, obvious question, a question her own castmates asked on camera, a question viewers debated online. What did Jen Shah actually do? Her answers were always vague. She was a marketing guru. She ran multiple businesses. She was the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, a direct response marketing expert. She was always on her phone, always closing deals, always working. But no one could ever figure out what product she was selling, what service she was providing. The truth was, Jen Shah did have a product, and that product was a lie. A cruel, devastating lie that she sold to the most vulnerable people in America. While she was on camera screaming about betrayal and throwing glasses of champagne, she was, according to the federal government, the mastermind of a massive nationwide fraud. Her real business was not marketing. It was a telemarketing scam. Here is how it worked. For nearly a decade, Jen Shah and her partners operated a complex scheme. They would find and sell lead lists, long lists of people's names and phone numbers. But these were not just any people. They were, overwhelmingly, the elderly and the vulnerable, people who were often retired, not tech-savvy, and trusting. First, they would be sold a lie, the promise of an online business of their own, a way to make money from home. Most of these victims, desperate for a little extra income, would pay a few $100s for a starter kit. But that was just the hook. Once a victim bought in, their name was passed to the real scammers, the closers, including, prosecutors said, Jen Shah's own operation. These closers would call the victims again and again, selling them more useless services. Business coaching, website design, tax preparation. All of it was worthless. All of it was a fraud. They were literally selling nothing. For thousands of dollars, it was a machine designed to suck every last penny from its victims. People lost their retirement. They lost their life savings. They lost their homes. They were left with nothing, chasing a dream that was designed from day one to be a nightmare. And where did that money go? It went straight into Jen Shah's pocket. It paid for the Shah Squad. It paid for the designer bags. It paid for the lavish parties. The entire Shah-amazing lifestyle that the world was watching on TV was funded by the stolen savings of elderly victims. She was a predator, hiding in plain sight as a reality TV star. For years, she got away with it. The operation was too complex, too spread out. But the federal government, specifically the Southern District of New York, was building a case. They were tracing the money. They were flipping her partners, getting them to cooperate. And they were closing in. And then came the moment that will go down in television history. It was March 30th, 2021. The cast of Real Housewives was gathered in a parking lot, about to leave for a trip to Vail. The cameras were rolling. The women were boarding a Sprinter van. And just as they were about to leave, Jen Shah got a phone call. Her face went pale. She told the other women her husband was in the hospital with internal bleeding, and she had to go. She took off her microphone and left in a hurry. The other women were confused but concerned. Minutes later, the parking lot swarmed. Homeland Security, NYPD, federal agents in full tactical gear, carrying automatic weapons. They surrounded the Sprinter van, the cameras still rolling. They asked the terrified housewives, "Is Jen Shah here?" It was a scene from a movie. It was the single most shocking, raw moment of reality TV ever captured. She hadn't left because of her husband. She had been tipped off just minutes before the raid. The feds had missed her. By an inch. They didn't miss her for long. She was arrested later that day. But this is where the story gets even more bizarre. Jen Shah did not go quiet. She did not plead guilty. She did the opposite. She doubled down. She filmed an entire new season of the show while under federal indictment. She proclaimed her innocence to anyone who would listen. She cried. She screamed. She claimed she was the victim, that the government was racist, that they were targeting her because she was a successful Polynesian woman. She launched a Shah-cessed merchandise line, selling not guilty hoodies, using the profits to pay for her $1 million legal defense. Her tagline for the season was, "The only thing I'm guilty of is being Shah-amazing." It was the ultimate act of reality TV hubris. She was quite literally performing her innocence for the cameras, all while the victims of her crimes were reading her name in the headlines. Her partner in the scheme, her first assistant Stuart Smith, had already pleaded guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. The feds had the bank records. They had the text messages. They had the victims. The trial was set. The government was ready. And then, just days before the trial was set to begin, the performance stopped. On July 11, 2022, Jen Shah, the woman who had screamed her innocence for a solid year, walked into a federal courtroom in Manhattan and pleaded guilty to everything. She admitted to conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She admitted in her own words that she knew it was wrong. The act was over. The mask was off. In court, the judge was not charmed. He did not care that she was a celebrity. He read letters from the victims, people who said their lives were forever ruined. He called her a leader of the fraud, who had shown no remorse until she was cornered. He sentenced Jen Shah to 6.5 years, 78 months, in federal prison. Her story is a chilling look at the modern hunger for fame. She was a woman so desperate to play a rich person on television that she was willing to destroy the lives of hundreds of real people to pay for the costume. Number 3. The Giudices. In 2009, American television was changed forever by one sound: the clatter of a fully loaded dining table being flipped upside down. It was the moment that launched the Real Housewives of New Jersey into the stratosphere, and at the center of that storm was Teresa Giudice. She was the undisputed queen of the show, loud, impulsive, fiercely protective of her family, and obsessed with a lifestyle of gaudy, over-the-top, gold-plated excess. Her husband, Giuseppe Joe Giudice, was her perfect match. A tough, old-school Italian contractor who mumbled his way through scenes and seemed to harbor a deep disdain for the cameras that had invaded his home. Their brand was family. Their life was a performance of wealth. They built a sprawling, custom-built 10,000-square-foot French chateau-style mansion in New Jersey. It was a monument of marble, granite, and onyx. Teresa famously spent over $100,000 on furniture for a single room. She threw lavish $1,000 parties for her children's birthdays. She was constantly draped in designer clothes and dripping in diamonds. They were a national sensation. They were the new face of reality TV, but the foundation of their custom-built mansion was made of lies. The money was not real. The lifestyle was a fantasy. And the old-school couple was, according to the federal government, committing new-school fraud in plain sight. Unlike the Chrisleys, who faked wealth to get a show, the Giudices were already on a show. Their fraud was one of desperation, a desperate, arrogant attempt to maintain the extravagant lifestyle that the show demanded. Their criminal activity was a two-part con. The first part happened before the cameras ever showed up. Between 2001 and 2008, Joe and Teresa were small-time business owners living far beyond their means. They wanted the mansions and the luxury cars now. So, according to federal prosecutors, they embarked on a brazen spree of bank fraud. It was not a sophisticated scheme. It was sloppy, and it was bold. Joe Giudice, who owned a small construction company, would create fake W-2 forms and fraudulent pay stubs. He would digitally give his wife Teresa a high-paying job at his own company. At one point, they submitted a loan application claiming Teresa was a realtor earning $15,000 a month. In reality, she was not employed at all. Armed with these fake documents, they went to bank after bank, taking out fraudulent mortgages, construction loans, and lines of credit. They lied about their income. They lied about their assets. They were actors, playing the part of a successful American family. And they were good at it. They successfully conned banks out of nearly $5 million. Then, in 2009, two things happened at the same time. Their show, The Real Housewives of New Jersey, premiered, and their house of cards collapsed. The loans were due. The $5 million was gone. And the couple, who was now suddenly famous, filed for bankruptcy, claiming they were over $11 million in debt. And this is where the second and far more stupid crime began. When you file for bankruptcy, you are making a sworn statement to the United States government. You are required, under penalty of law, to disclose every single asset you own and every single dollar you earn. Teresa and Joe Giudice lied to a federal bankruptcy court. They didn't just lie. They actively concealed their new reality TV fortune. They hid their income from the show. They hid the money they were making from magazine appearances, book deals. Teresa's skinny Italian cookbook was a bestseller, and website sales. They conveniently forgot to mention the luxury cars, the expensive furniture, and the jewelry. They thought they could play the system both ways. They wanted the sympathy and debt forgiveness of bankruptcy, all while cashing Bravo checks and living like royalty on television. But they had made a critical error. They had underestimated the one person you must never lie to: the bankruptcy trustee. The trustee assigned to their case was not a fan of reality TV. He was a professional, and their story did not add up. He saw the glamorous lifestyle on TV. He saw the designer clothes. He saw the lavish parties. And then he looked at their bankruptcy filing, which claimed they were broke. The math was not mathing. The trustee flagged the case, and that flag alerted the federal government. The FBI and the IRS began a quiet meticulous investigation. They subpoenaed the contracts from Bravo. They saw the real income. They saw the real book deal money. And they compared it to the broke couple in the bankruptcy filing. The case was a slam dunk. In July 2013, the fantasy world shattered. A federal grand jury returned a staggering 41-count indictment against Joe and Teresa Giudice. Conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud, bank fraud, Bankruptcy fraud, and for Joe, failure to file tax returns. At first, they denied everything. They played the victims. They blamed their lawyers. They blamed the haters. But the evidence was overwhelming. The feds had the fake W-2s. They had the Bravo contracts. They had the sworn bankruptcy depositions where they had lied under oath. Facing a trial they could not possibly win, they took a plea deal. They pleaded guilty. The sentencing in October 2014 was a spectacle. The couple showed up to court, still arrogant, reportedly carrying a probation report filled with luxury cars and jewelry they forgot to list. The judge, U.S. District Judge Esther Salas, was furious. She tore into them, calling their conduct brazen. She slammed them for not disclosing all their assets, even for the sentencing report. She had to decide, would she send a mother of 4 young daughters to prison? The answer was yes. The judge made an example of them. She sentenced Teresa Giudice to 15 months in federal prison. She sentenced Joe Giudice to 41 months, and in a move to protect their children, she staggered the sentences. Teresa would go first. The world watched in surreal fascination as the Queen of New Jersey traded her marble mansion for a federal prison bunk. But the story was not over. As Teresa served her time and returned home, a far darker fate was waiting for Joe. He had one more secret. Giuseppe, Joe Giudice, had lived in America since he was an infant, but he had never become a U.S. citizen. His fraud convictions were aggravated felonies, and for a non-citizen, even a legal resident, that means one thing: mandatory deportation. After Joe completed his 41-month sentence, he was not released. He was immediately transferred to the custody of ICE. He fought the deportation order for months from an ICE detention center. But the law was clear. He had committed a serious fraud. He was deported to his native Italy, a country he had not lived in since he was a child. The fraud did not just cost them their money. It did not just cost them their freedom. It cost them their family. The Queen of New Jersey had lost her king, banished from the country, all because they were so desperate to fund a reality TV lie. Number 4. Mike, the situation. Sorrentino in 2009, a cultural tsunami hit the world. It was loud, it was tan, and it was unapologetically trashy. Its name was Jersey Shore. And at the absolute epicenter of this global phenomenon was one man. Or more accurately, one man's abdomen, Mike. The situation. Sorrentino was not just a cast member. He was the show. He was the alpha male, the king of the house, the man who turned a simple 3-step routine into a national catchphrase. Gym, tan, laundry. He was pure, unfiltered arrogance. He was a walking soundbite. He lifted his shirt in clubs, at restaurants, on red carpets, revealing his only real asset, the situation, and the world. Could not get enough. The show was an instant monster hit. The cast, especially Mike, became millionaires overnight. He was not just a reality star. He was an A-list celebrity. He was on Dancing with the Stars. He was in commercials. He was paid $50,000 just to walk into a nightclub, take his shirt off, and leave. He was making a fortune. He was the king of a new, gaudy, gold-chained empire. But while the entire world was watching his abs, the federal government was watching his bank account. While Mike was screaming GTL, he had conveniently forgotten about a fourth letter, T, taxes. Between 2010 and 2012, at the absolute height of his fame, Mike, the situation Sorrentino, earned a staggering $8.9 million, and he decided just not to pay taxes on it. But this was not a simple mistake. This was not an accounting error. This was an active, deliberate, and criminal fraud. Mike, and his brother Mark, who served as his manager, had set up a series of corporations: MPS Entertainment, Situation Nation. These were supposed to be the legitimate businesses that handled his millions. Instead, they became the washing machines for his fraud. Mike was a cash-based celebrity. He was paid in stacks of cash for his appearances, and he needed to get that cash into the bank without alerting the IRS. He knew the rule, the one every criminal, from a drug dealer to a white-collar fraudster, knows: the $10,000 limit. Any cash deposit over $10,000, and the bank is legally required to file a report straight to the federal government. So Mike Sorrentino began a new routine. It wasn't gym, tan, laundry. It was bank, bank, bank. According to federal prosecutors, he embarked on a classic structuring scheme. He would take a $50,000 cash payment and break it into pieces. He would walk into a bank and deposit $9,000. He would walk to the bank across the street and deposit $9,500. He would go to another branch and deposit $8,000, over and over. Dozens of deposits, all meticulously kept just under the $10,000 trigger. He thought he was a genius. He thought he was smarter than the United States Treasury. He was wrong. For a bank teller, a single $9,500 deposit is normal. But for a federal computer algorithm, dozens of $9,500 deposits, all from the same person, all in cash. It's not a coincidence. It is a giant, flashing red flag. It is the very definition of structuring. The IRS launched a quiet investigation. They subpoenaed his contracts from MTV. They subpoenaed his appearance logs. They saw the real money, the $8.9 million. And then they looked at his tax returns, which claimed he was practically broke, but the fraud didn't stop there. He was also, according to the government, living his entire champagne lifestyle for free. He was allegedly claiming every luxury purchase as a business expense. Those $1,000 Gucci tracksuits, those luxury car payments, those gold chains. He was writing them all off as uniforms and company vehicles. He was treating the United States Treasury like a joke. In 2014, the party came to a screeching halt. A federal grand jury indicted Mike and his brother Mark on multiple counts of tax fraud and structuring. But this was still the situation. He was still arrogant. He was still famous. He pleaded not guilty. He went on TV. He blamed his accountants. He blamed his brother. What the public didn't see, however, was that the man behind the character was collapsing. The pressure of fame, the federal indictment, and a secret crippling addiction to prescription painkillers. He was a paranoid, addicted, and terrified man, trapped inside the situation character. The case dragged on for 4 long years. The government built its case, brick by brick. The bank slips were undeniable. The contracts were ironclad. He was cornered. In January 2018, the arrogance was finally gone. Mike Sorrentino, no longer the situation, walked into a federal courtroom and pleaded guilty to 1 count of tax evasion. His brother pleaded guilty to aiding in the preparation of a fraudulent return. The sentencing was his day of reckoning. The judge looked at a man who had earned nearly $9 million and had deliberately and systematically cheated his country. He was sentenced to 8 months in federal prison. His brother was sentenced to 2 years. In January 2019, Mike Sorrentino, the man who had been the king of reality TV, reported to the Otisville Federal Prison in New York. The party was officially over. But this is where Mike's story takes a turn that almost no one on this list ever manages. This is not a story of a permanent downfall. It is a story of an almost impossible redemption. Prison was not the end for Mike. It was the beginning. Before his sentencing, he had already started to change. He had finally, after multiple relapses, gotten sober. He had reconnected with his college sweetheart Lauren. He had proposed. The man who went to prison was not the arrogant kid from the Jersey Shore. He was a humbled man, clean from drugs and desperate to fix his life. The 8 months in prison was his penance. He served his time, he worked in the prison kitchen, and he stayed clean. The man who walked out of prison in September 2019 was not the situation. He was Big Daddy Sitch. He returned to the Jersey Shore, family vacation, as a completely new character, the one he had created, not the one MTV had. He was sober. He was married. He was a doting husband and soon a father. He became the group's moral compass, the sober, wise, and surprisingly funny voice of reason. His story is the rarest of all celebrity frauds. He is a man who had to be federally indicted, publicly humiliated, and locked in a prison cell, to finally kill the toxic character that had made him famous, and in doing so, finally save himself. Number 5. Abby Lee Miller. She was, for a time, the most terrifying woman on television. Abby Lee Miller was not a housewife. She was not a Giudice. She was a tyrant. The star of Dance Moms, she was a screaming, demanding, and brutally effective dance instructor from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Her entire world was built on one single, crushing concept: perfection. She was famous for the pyramid, a weekly ritual where she would rank her child dancers from worst to best, often with heartbreaking cruelty. She was famous for making children cry. She was famous for telling her students, "Everyone is replaceable." Her brand was discipline. Her brand was toughness. Her brand was winning at any cost. She lectured the world, week after week, about hard work, about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and about the sloppiness she saw in everyone else. But the entire time she was on television, screaming at children for minor imperfections, Abby Lee Miller was, according to the federal government, a sloppy, arrogant, and brazen criminal. The ultimate irony of her story is this: her crime was not greed. At first, her crime was desperation. And her big break was the very thing that would send her to prison. Before the fame, before the TV shows, before the pyramid, Abby Lee Miller was just a local dance teacher, and her business, the Abby Lee Dance Company, was failing. Badly. By 2010, she was drowning in debt. She owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in property taxes. She was facing foreclosure on her studio. She was, in simple terms, broke. So in December 2010, she did what millions of struggling Americans do. She filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. When you file for bankruptcy, you are asking a federal court for protection. You are swearing, under oath, that you have disclosed every single asset you have and every single dollar of income you earn. In return, the court shields you from your creditors. It is a sacred agreement with the government. Abby Lee Miller lied. At the exact same time, she was in a federal courtroom, telling a judge she was worthless. Television producers were filming a pilot in her studio. That pilot was Dance Moms. In 2011, the show premiered on Lifetime, and it was not a small, quiet hit. It was a global phenomenon. Abby Lee Miller went from a broke, unknown dance teacher in Pittsburgh to one of the most famous women in the world. And the money. The money started flooding in. Checks from the TV show. Checks for spin-offs like Abby's Ultimate Dance Competition. Checks for merchandise. Checks for international master classes. Suddenly, the broke woman in bankruptcy court was earning hundreds of thousands of dollars. And she had a choice. She could go to the bankruptcy trustee and say, "Good news! The show is a hit. I can pay off all my debts." That was the legal, moral, and correct thing to do. Instead, Abby Lee Miller decided to commit a federal crime. According to prosecutors, she embarked on a meticulous, multi-year conspiracy to hide her new fortune from the very court that was protecting her. It was a breathtakingly arrogant deception. She instructed the producers to pay her in elaborate ways. She opened secret bank accounts that the court knew nothing about. She had paychecks, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, sent directly to her mother. She sold merchandise online and funneled the money into secret accounts. For 2 solid years, she would appear on international television, a famous, wealthy superstar, and then walk into bankruptcy court and swear, under oath, that she was still just a poor dance teacher struggling to make ends meet. She thought she had fooled everyone. The lawyers, the trustees, the IRS. She thought she was smarter than the system. She had fooled everyone. Except one person. The one person she absolutely could not afford to fool. The bankruptcy judge. In 2012, the judge assigned to her case, Judge Thomas Agresti, was at home, channel surfing. He was flipping through the channels and he stopped. He saw a commercial for Abby's ultimate dance competition. He squinted at the screen. He saw the loud, obnoxious woman at the center of the show, and he recognized her. It was the broke dance teacher from his courtroom. The judge reportedly did not launch a complex investigation. He just Googled her. He saw the hit show. He saw the spin-offs. He saw the merchandise. He saw the fame. And he realized he was being played. He was being lied to in his own courtroom by a reality TV star. He was furious. Judge Agresti did not just dismiss her case. He alerted the federal authorities. The FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division took over. And when they started digging, they uncovered a fraud far bigger than the judge could have imagined. They found the secret bank accounts. They found the hidden paychecks. They found, in total, more than $775,000 in income that she had actively concealed. And they found another crime. During her international tours, Abby was also smuggling money. On a trip to Australia, she had her employees divide more than $120,000 in Australian currency and smuggle it back into the United States in plastic bags hidden in their own luggage. She was not just a fraudster. She was a money launderer. In 2015, she was indicted on 20 counts of fraud. Like every other star on this list, her first reaction was arrogance. She claimed it was a mistake. She blamed her accountants. She said she was a creative artist and was just bad with paperwork. But the paperwork was a stack of lies, and the feds had the receipts. Facing a trial she could not win, she finally pleaded guilty to bankruptcy fraud and to the cash smuggling scheme. At her sentencing, the tough woman who had built a career on making others cry broke down. She wept. She begged for mercy. She blamed the fame. She said she was not that person. The judge was unmoved. He sentenced Abby Lee Miller, the woman who demanded perfection, to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. Her downfall was a perfect karmic tragedy. She lost her show. She lost her business. She lost her freedom. She reported to prison in 2017, and after serving 8 months, she was released, only to be diagnosed just weeks later with a crippling form of cancer that left her in a wheelchair. Her story is a brutal lesson in irony. The woman who built an empire on screaming at others for their sloppy mistakes was brought down by the sloppiest, most brazen fraud of all. Number 6. Joe Exotic. In March 2020, the world shut down. We were trapped in our homes, terrified of an invisible virus. And in that moment of global panic, we all plugged into Netflix. And we all went insane together. We were introduced to a man who did not seem real. A gay, polygamist, country-singing, roadside zoo-owning, gun-toting operator with a blonde mullet and a simmering, toxic ego. His name was Joe Exotic. And the show was Tiger King. It was not a reality show. It was a fever dream, a chaotic 7-part documentary that felt like a dispatch from a forgotten planet. And at the center of it was Joe, the self-proclaimed Tiger King. He was the paranoid, charismatic, and utterly unhinged ruler of the GW Zoo in Oklahoma, a dusty, dangerous, and deeply sad kingdom built on the exploitation of giant, majestic cats. For millions of people, he was a folk hero, a hilarious, over-the-top character. But the documentary we all watched was not a reality show. It was a true crime story. And Joe Exotic was not a character. He was a con man, a fraudster, and a convicted federal criminal who was about to be sentenced to 21 years in prison. The story of his downfall is not just one crime. It is 3 separate crimes, all born from the same source. His monstrous, uncontrollable ego. The first crime was the one we all saw, the one that was the entire basis of his kingdom, the wildlife fraud. Joe's business model was not just showing tigers. His real business was breeding them. He was running a cub-petting mill. He knew that people would pay hundreds of dollars to hold a baby tiger cub, so he bred them relentlessly. But there is a problem with this business model. A baby tiger is only cute and safe for about 12 weeks. After that, they become too big, too dangerous, and too expensive to feed. So what happened to the dozens, even hundreds of cubs that outgrew the photo op? This is where the fraud comes in. To the outside world, Joe claimed he was a conservationist. But according to the federal government, he was a trafficker. When a cub got too big, he would get rid of it. He would sell it on the black market. He would falsify the paperwork, claiming the tiger was being donated to another zoo, when in reality it was being sold for profit. And sometimes, according to his own employees and the federal indictment, when he couldn't sell them, he would just kill them. He was convicted of shooting and killing 5 healthy tigers to make room for new, cuter, more profitable cubs. This was his first fraud, lying to the public, lying to PETA, and lying to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But this fraud made him a very powerful enemy. Her name was Carole Baskin, the flower crown-wearing, bicycle-riding, cool cats and kittens owner of Big Cat Rescue in Florida. To Joe, Carole was not an activist. She was a hypocrite, a woman who, he believed, had murdered her own husband and fed him to her tigers, and she was trying to shut him down. Carole didn't just protest. She sued him. She sued him for trademark infringement, for $1 million, because he had created a rival company with a similar-sounding name. And this is where Joe Exotic committed his second fraud. Faced with $1 million judgment he could not pay, Joe did exactly what Abby Lee Miller and the Chrisleys did. He committed bankruptcy fraud. He began to frantically move money. He transferred the zoo, the land, the assets, all into the names of his mother and his new business partner, Jeff Lowe. He tried to make himself broke on paper, to defraud the court system and ensure that Carole Baskin would never see a dime. But it didn't work. The court saw right through it. The $1 million judgment stood. His kingdom was collapsing. He was financially ruined. He had lost his zoo. He had lost his power. He had lost everything. And a man like Joe Exotic, a man whose entire identity was built on being the king, cannot handle loss. He was bankrupt. He was cornered. And his mind, already a toxic stew of paranoia and meth, snapped. He decided that Carole Baskin had to die. This is where the story turns from a sad tale of fraud into a cold-blooded conspiracy to commit murder. This was not just Crazy Joe screaming into a webcam. He did not just talk about killing her. He took active, verifiable steps to make it happen. First, he tried to hire one of his own employees, a handyman at the zoo named Alan Glover. He gave him cash. He gave him a burner phone. He gave him instructions. Drive to Florida, cut off her head, and bring it back. But Alan, as Joe would soon find out, was not a killer. So Joe, now desperate, turned to someone else, a new friend, a man he thought was a tough, reliable, old-school hitman. And this was the final fatal mistake. The man Joe Exotic tried to hire was an undercover FBI agent. In December 2017, Joe met with the agent. The entire conversation was recorded. He was not playing a character. He was clear. He was lucid. He was desperate. He offered the agent $10,000. He discussed the plan. He told him how to kill her. He told him to follow her into a mall parking lot and shoot her. He sealed his own fate. In 2018, while the Netflix cameras were still rolling, federal agents arrested Joe Exotic in Florida. The circus was over. The trial was a slam dunk for the prosecution. They did not just have the wildlife fraud, the dead tigers, and the falsified paperwork. They had the tapes. They had the voice of the Tiger King himself, calmly, coldly contracting a murder. The jury found him guilty on 19 counts, 2 counts of murder for hire, 8 counts of wildlife fraud, and 9 counts of violating the Endangered Species Act. He was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison, later reduced by 1 year to 21. The ultimate irony is that in prison, Joe Exotic finally got the one thing he had always craved: global fame. Tiger King exploded. He became the most famous inmate in America. He wrote letters to the president begging for a pardon. He ran for president from prison. He is the ultimate example of a reality TV star in reverse. A man whose crimes and frauds were so bizarre, so extreme, and so perfectly captured on camera that it turned a failed, bankrupt, and deeply cruel con man into a household name. Number 7. Richard Hatch. In the year 2000, the world changed. A new millennium had dawned, and with it, a new kind of television. It was not a sitcom. It was not a drama. It was a social experiment. It was a phenomenon. It was Survivor. 16 ordinary Americans were marooned on a remote island in the South China Sea, forced to outwit, outplay, and outlast each other for a grand prize of $1 million. And among those 16 was one man who was anything but ordinary. His name was Richard Hatch. He was a 40-year-old corporate trainer from Rhode Island. And from the very first episode, he was the villain. He was arrogant. He was manipulative. He was condescending. And most memorably, he was frequently, inexplicably, naked. While the other contestants were worried about making friends and playing fair, Richard Hatch saw the game for what it was, a ruthless corporate chess match. He didn't come to make friends. He came to win. And he did something no one had ever done. He created the alliance. It seems simple now, but in 2000, it was a revolutionary and deeply controversial concept. He formed a secret voting bloc that, one by one, methodically picked off every single person who was not in their group. It was cold. It was calculating. And it was borderline evil. America watched, horrified and fascinated. They had never seen a hero like this. On August 23, 2000, the finale of Survivor, Borneo, aired. And in a moment that would define reality TV for decades, the villain won. The manipulative, naked corporate trainer became the sole survivor. More than 51 million people watched live as host Jeff Probst handed Richard Hatch a check. For $1 million. He was a household name. He was a millionaire. He was the king of a new television empire. He had successfully outwitted 15 people, but he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had forgotten about one final opponent, an opponent that he could not vote off the island. The IRS, Richard Hatch's fraud, is perhaps the most arrogant, simple, and baffling fraud in celebrity history. Here is what he did. He took his $1 million check. He went home. He went on talk shows. He bought a new house, and then he just didn't pay taxes on it. He did not hide the money, like Abby Lee Miller. He did not create fake bank accounts like the Chrisleys. He simply ignored it. The federal government and the IRS waited. Tax day came and went. Richard Hatch filed his tax return for the year 2000. And the $1 million prize? It was nowhere to be found. He just left it off. This was not an accident. This was not a sloppy paperwork mistake. This was a deliberate, conscious choice. This is where the arrogance becomes truly breathtaking. Hatch later went on a radio show and, when asked about the taxes, he publicly, on the air, said he believed that CBS, the network, was supposed to pay them. He believed the prize was $1 million net. He believed the rules, the fundamental law of the land that every citizen, from a plumber to a CEO, has to follow, simply did not apply to him. He was the sole survivor. He was special. The IRS, of course, does not care if you are special. They saw the 51 million people who watched him win. They saw the giant check, and they saw his fraudulent tax return. But the fraud was even worse than just the prize money. Because he was the most famous man in America, offers poured in. A Boston radio station hired him for a co-hosting gig. They paid him $325,000. Did he pay taxes on that? No, he just kept it. He was also at the same time running a charity he had co-founded called the Straight Shooters, a camp for at-risk youth. The IRS investigation discovered that Richard Hatch was taking donations to the charity and just depositing them into his personal bank account. He was stealing from his own charity. This was not a mistake. This was a pattern. This was a man who believed that money, all money, belonged to him. The federal government is patient. They spent 4 years meticulously building their case. They gathered the survivor contracts. They gathered the radio station contracts. They gathered the bank statements from his charity. In 2005, the hammer finally fell. Richard Hatch was indicted on 10 counts, including tax evasion, filing a false tax return, and wire fraud. His trial was a perfect reflection of his time on the island. It was a circus, and, in a final act of supreme arrogance, Richard Hatch decided to represent himself for part of the trial. He believed he was smart enough to outwit the federal prosecutors. He tried to charm the jury. He argued his bizarre theory that CBS was supposed to pay. He argued that he was just a TV personality, not a sophisticated accountant. The jury did not buy it. They saw a man who had won the lottery and who was so greedy and so arrogant that he refused to pay his fair share. They found him guilty. At his sentencing in 2006, the judge was not amused. He sentenced Richard Hatch, the original reality TV star, to 51 months in federal prison. That is more than 4 years. For a crime he could have completely avoided by simply paying his taxes. The man who had won Survivor in 39 days was now going to prison for 130 days. He served his time. But the story, somehow, gets even more absurd. He was released in 2009, and part of his probation, the single most important rule, was that he must file and pay his taxes. So what did he do? He didn't file his taxes. Again, the judge was furious. He was sent back to prison in 2011 for another 9 months. He had learned absolutely nothing. Richard Hatch is the original sin of reality TV fraud. He was the first winner. He was the first millionaire. And he was the first, and perhaps the most arrogant, con man. He proved that you can outwit, outplay, and outlast 15 people on an island. But you cannot ever outwit the IRS. Number 8. Apollo Nida on The Real Housewives of Atlanta. She was the Southern Belle. Phaedra Parks, a high-powered, sharp-witted attorney, a funeral home director, and a picture of perfect Southern decorum. And by her side was her handsome, muscular, and supposedly successful husband, Apollo Nida. They were the it couple, the Atlanta power pair, Frick and Frack, as they called themselves. He was the supportive, entrepreneurial husband to her boss lady wife. Their storyline was one of family, business, and wealth. Apollo, with his enigmatic smile and perfect physique, claimed to be a businessman, running a vague but seemingly successful asset recovery firm. They had it all. The fame, the mansions, the luxury cars, the beautiful children. But the entire time they were presenting this perfect image to the world, Apollo Nida was living a shocking double life. He was not just playing a character on TV. He was acting as a legitimate citizen, while running a massive multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy, and the assets he was recovering were stolen. The first secret was one the show's producers knew, but the audience did not at first. Apollo Nida was already a convicted felon. He wasn't just a troubled kid. From 2004 to 2009, he had served 5 years in federal prison. The charge? Racketeering, specifically a sophisticated multi-state car theft ring. He was, by definition, a career criminal. He had met Phaedra. He had gotten out of prison. He had married her. He was given a second chance, a new life, and a platform on one of the most popular reality shows in the world. He had an opportunity to go completely legitimate. Instead, he took his old skills, and he perfected them. While Phaedra was filming, arguing over etiquette and party invitations, Apollo was in the background, on his laptop, running a ghost factory. According to federal prosecutors, Apollo Nida was the mastermind of a sprawling, complex scheme involving identity theft, shell corporations, and breathtaking fraud. This was not a simple tax-dodging case. This was a high-level criminal enterprise. Here is how the con worked. First, Apollo and his partners would steal the identities of real people, dozens of them. Second, they would create a series of fake companies, shell corporations with official-sounding names, registered to P.O. boxes. These companies were nothing but paper. Third, he would take those stolen identities and go to the bank. He would open real business bank accounts in the names of his fake companies. This is where the con gets its genius. Apollo now had a network of legitimate-looking bank accounts that he, and he alone, controlled. Now, he needed to get them funded. He did this in multiple ways. He would allegedly file fraudulent tax returns in the names of his stolen identities, directing the refund checks straight into his secret accounts. He would get his hands on stolen U.S. Treasury checks, checks from retirement accounts of Delta employees, and checks from state governments, and wash them all through his network of fake business accounts. But his specialty, the one he had perfected in his first prison stint, was auto loan fraud. Apollo would get access to VIN numbers, the unique ID codes, for real cars sitting on dealership lots. He would then, using one of his stolen identities, apply for an auto loan from a bank to buy that car. The bank, seeing a real person and a real car, would approve the loan and wire the money, not to the car dealership, but to one of Apollo's fake companies, which he claimed was the dealership. The bank would send $50,000. Apollo would immediately cash it out. The bank was now left with a $50,000 loan for a car that was still sitting on the dealership lot, a car that had never actually been sold. The buyer was a ghost, the dealership was a shell, and the money was in Apollo Nida's pocket. He was a vampire sucking money from the system, and he did this over and over. The arrogance is staggering. He was doing this while he was on The Real Housewives of Atlanta. He was sitting on the reunion couches, under the bright lights, arguing with other cast members, all while he was an active, high-level federal criminal. He was so arrogant, he even allegedly bragged about it, telling one of his co-conspirators that he had to stay on TV because it gave him legitimacy and cover for his crimes. He was using his fame as a shield, but the shield was about to break. The federal government was not investigating Apollo. They were investigating his partner, and when the feds put the pressure on her, she did what every conman's partner does. She flipped. She gave up her boss. She gave the government the name that would make their careers. The reality TV star Apollo Nida. In September 2013, the double life came crashing down. Federal agents, who had been building their case for 2 years, arrested him. And this is where the reality became too real. The arrest and the subsequent trial became the central storyline of the entire season of Real Housewives. The world watched in real time as the perfect marriage completely disintegrated. The questions were explosive. Did Phaedra, the high-powered attorney, know? Was she his legal advisor? Was she the mastermind? Phaedra, for her part, denied everything. She claimed she was just a wife, blinded by love, and just as duped as the government. But the final, most devastating scene was yet to come. Apollo pleaded guilty. Facing sentencing, he knew he was gone for a long time. The judge was not going to be lenient. This was not his first offense. This was a man who had been given a second chance and had used it to commit more fraud, while on probation for his last fraud. In July 2014, the judge sentenced Apollo Nida to 8 years in federal prison. The cameras were rolling on the day he was scheduled to self-surrender, and the calm, cool Apollo vanished. The perfect husband snapped. In a terrifying, chaotic scene, he showed up at the house, unannounced, violating his bond. He stormed through the garage, screaming at Phaedra. He accused her of abandoning him. He accused her of cheating. He ran through their marble mansion like a caged animal. It was the moment the mask, the performance, the entire frick and frack lie. Finally, violently, died. He reported to prison. Phaedra divorced him. He had it all. A beautiful family. Worldwide fame. Money from the show. A chance at a completely new life, and he threw it all away. For the hustle. He was a man so addicted to the con, so addicted to the game that he couldn't stop, even when the whole world was watching. Number 9. Mike Hassini. Across the Atlantic, in the United Kingdom, there is a different kind of reality TV. It's called structured reality. A show called The Only Way is Essex, or TOWIE, perfected the formula. It follows the lives of a group of young, impossibly attractive and supposedly wealthy people from Essex, England. The show is built on a fantasy of nightclubs, champagne bottles, fake tans, designer watches, and high-end sports cars. The unspoken rule is that you must look rich, you must look successful. The pressure to maintain this lifestyle is everything. In 2015, a new character joined this world. His name was Mike Hassini. He was the new alpha male, a personal trainer with a chiseled physique, a perfect smile, and an endless supply of expensive clothes. He was instantly popular. He drove a black Mercedes. He wore expensive watches. He was the perfect picture of a self-made, new-money TOWIE star. His life on the show was about petty arguments, relationship drama, and most of all, looking the part. But there was a problem. The lifestyle he was projecting cost a lot more than the TV show was paying, and the world was about to find out that Mike Hassini was not just playing a character. He was living a secret criminal life. His designer clothes and luxury cars were allegedly funded by a dark, vicious fraud, one that targeted the most vulnerable people in society. This was not a simple tax dodge. This was not a bankruptcy lie. Mike Hassini, according to the UK government, was a key player in a £450,000 boiler room scam, and his role was to wash the dirty money. Here is how the con worked. It was a classic, cruel, and highly effective fraud. A group of con men set up two fake companies. They had professional-looking websites. They had fake addresses. They had official-sounding names, Inside the Market and TTR Management. Their business? Selling rare diamonds and binary options as a can't-miss investment. Next, they bought lead lists of people, mostly elderly and retired, who were looking for a safe place to put their life savings. Then, the boiler room began. The con men, acting as high-pressure brokers, would cold call these victims. They would promise them guaranteed returns. They would tell them they were doubling their money. They were charming. They were aggressive. They were experts at building fake trust. The victims, believing they were securing their retirement, did exactly what they were told. They wired their life savings, tens of thousands of pounds, to these fake companies. And the second the money hit the account, it was gone. The victims would call, asking where their profits were. The numbers would be disconnected. The websites would vanish. The victims were left with nothing. They had lost their homes. They had lost their entire life's work. It was a devastating, heartless theft. But this created a problem for the con men. They now had hundreds of thousands of pounds in stolen, dirty money. They couldn't just buy a Lamborghini with it. The banks would see it. The police would trace it. They needed to clean it. They needed a money launderer. And this is where the reality TV star comes in. Mike Hassini was not one of the brokers on the phone. His job was, in many ways, more important. He was the face. He was the launderer. According to prosecutors, Hassini and his own partners formed a third set of fake companies, shell corporations. These companies looked legitimate, run by a famous, successful personal trainer and TV star. The con men from the boiler room would transfer the stolen victim money directly to Mike Hassini's company. Hassini, for a hefty fee, would then wash the money. He would disguise it, run it through his own accounts, and then send the now clean cash back to the scammers. He was the getaway driver. He was the man providing the legitimate cover for a gang that was robbing the elderly. His fame was his greatest tool. Who would ever suspect that the guy from TOWIE was a high-level money launderer? But the police were not watching TOWIE. They were listening to the victims. The Essex police began a complex, multi-year investigation. They started with the victims. They followed the paper trail. They saw the money move from the victims to the fake diamond companies. And then, in a stunning discovery, they saw it move again to a company controlled by Mike Hassini. The investigation was meticulous. They unraveled the whole conspiracy. They had the bank transfers. They had the text messages. They had the shell companies. In 2018, the fantasy life came crashing down. Mike Hassini was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. He denied it, of course. He tried to distance himself, but the evidence was undeniable. He was a link, a crucial, greedy link, in a chain of devastating fraud. In 2021, facing a mountain of evidence, he pleaded guilty. At his sentencing, the judge was not interested in his TV career. He was interested in the victims. He heard stories of people whose lives were irretrievably ruined. He called the fraud a heartless and wicked operation. Mike Hassini, the man who built his image on looking rich, on projecting success at all costs, was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months in prison. His story is a chilling look at the dark side of structured reality, a world where the pressure to look successful is so intense that a man would allegedly partner with a criminal gang, wash their dirty money and fund his fake lifestyle with the stolen savings of the elderly. He was the ultimate example of fake it till you make it. But his fake life was built on real victims, and his making it ended him in a very real prison cell. Number 10. Billy McFarland. He was not a traditional reality star. He did not audition for a show. He did not flip a table in New Jersey or host a Dance Moms pyramid. Billy McFarland created his own reality, a reality so fake, so alluring, and so catastrophically fraudulent that Netflix and Hulu both made hit documentaries about him, turning him into one of the most infamous reality villains of the 21st century. He was not just a con man. He was a mirror, a reflection of a generation obsessed with one single thing: influence. In 2017, the internet was invaded. A single blank orange tile. It appeared on the Instagram feed of every major supermodel on Earth, all at the same time. Kendall Jenner, Bella Hadid, Hailey Bieber, Emily Ratajkowski. It was a silent, coordinated, and brilliant piece of marketing. It was a digital mystery. What was Fyre Festival? The promise was not just a music festival. It was a fantasy. It was billed as the event of a generation, a 2-weekend luxury experience on a private tropical island in the Bahamas, an island, they claimed, that was once owned by the infamous drug lord Pablo Escobar. The promotional video was a masterpiece of deception. It showed supermodels running in slow motion on white sand beaches. It showed private jets, massive yachts, and gourmet food. It promised luxury villas, 5-star chefs, and performances from the biggest music acts in the world. And at the center of this hurricane of hype was the 25-year-old visionary, the man behind the orange tile, Billy McFarland. He was the new breed of celebrity, the millennial tech bro entrepreneur, a smooth-talking, confident, fast-moving kid from New Jersey who had previously founded a luxury credit card for millennials. He partnered with rapper Ja Rule, and together they sold this impossible dream. And the world bought it. They sold thousands of tickets, some costing as much as $100,000. Influencers, rich kids, and partygoers all scrambled for a ticket to paradise. They had sold out a festival that did not exist. Because while Billy McFarland was on a yacht with supermodels, filming the promo video, he had nothing. It was all a lie. This was not a case of bad planning. This was not getting in over his head. This was, according to the federal government, active, criminal, wire fraud from day one. To fund this fantasy, Billy needed millions from investors. So he simply invented a reality. According to federal prosecutors, he created a fake universe of success. He faked wire transfers. He doctored his company's bank statements to show they had millions, when in fact, they were almost broke. He lied to investors, claiming his company, Fyre Media, was on the verge of being sold for $90 million. He claimed he, personally, had millions in stock. It was all a performance, a complete fantasy. He successfully raised over $26 million from sophisticated investors, based on digital smoke and pure, unfiltered arrogance. The money he raised was not spent on building a festival. It was spent on marketing the festival. He was, in effect, using the investors' money to pay the supermodels, to create the lie that he would then sell to the ticket buyers. It was a perfect circle of fraud. And in April 2017, the lie met the real world. The influencers arrived, their phones out, ready to capture paradise. And what they found was a post-apocalyptic nightmare. There was no Escobar's Island. The deal had fallen through. They were on a gravel lot on the main island. There were no luxury villas. There were leftover, rain-soaked FEMA disaster relief tents. There was no gourmet food. There was the infamous limp cheese sandwich served in a styrofoam container. It was not a festival. It was a refugee camp. The artists had all canceled because they had never been paid. There was no security. There was no medical staff. There was no running water. As the sun went down, the chaos began. The videos that came out were not of supermodels on yachts. They were of panicked, wealthy kids fighting over wet mattresses in the dark. It was the most public, most documented, most hilarious failure in modern history. The world watched, live on Twitter, as the entire con collapsed in real time. Billy McFarland became a global laughingstock. But the federal government was not laughing. He was arrested and charged with wire fraud. He was released on $300,000 bail. His life was over. He was facing decades in prison. He was a pariah. Any normal human being would go silent, hire a lawyer, show remorse, and pray. But Billy McFarland was not a normal human being. He was a con man. He was pathologically an addict, addicted to the game. While on bail for the $26 million Fyre Festival fraud, he immediately started a new fraud. He could not stop. He set up a new fake company called NYC VIP, and he started selling fake, exclusive tickets to events he had absolutely no access to. The Met Gala, the Victoria's Secret fashion show, Burning Man. He was targeting the same email list of people he had just defrauded with Fyre Festival. He was, quite literally, conning his own victims, while wearing a federal ankle monitor. This was the final nail in his coffin. The prosecutors were stunned. The judge was furious. This was not a mistake. This was not a kid who dreamed too big. This was his character. This was a man who was, in his very DNA, a serial fraudster. In March 2018, Billy McFarland pleaded guilty. At his sentencing, the judge was merciless. He did not care about the documentaries. He did not care about the hype. He cared about the victims, the investors he had bankrupted, the ticket buyers he had stranded, and the new victims he had created while on bail. He sentenced Billy McFarland, the 26-year-old visionary, to 6 years in federal prison. His story is the ultimate fraud for our generation. He became a reality star because of his crime. The Netflix and Hulu documentaries turned his spectacular downfall into the must-see TV event of the year. He is a mirror. He proved that in the age of Instagram, you can sell nothing, as long as it is wrapped in enough influence. He didn't just sell fake tickets. He sold the idea of fame itself, and the whole world bought it.